Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the CITIC Bookstore, and thank you for joining the Berggruen Seminar 14, The Intuition Trap. My name is Liu Yuanyuan, and I work at the Berggruen Research Center at Peking University. The Berggruen Research Center is a collaboration between the Berggruen Institute and Peking University. Since 2018, our center has been engaging with outstanding thinkers to examine, share, and develop ideas in areas of frontier science, technology, and philosophy, ancient wisdom and global governance, and creative futures. I'd like to invite you to join Berggruen's audience WeChat group, where we share updates on all our public events. Finally, our sincere gratitude goes to the City Bookstore, our longtime collaborator. City Bookstore provides a cultural space that interrogates books, intellectual discussion, and fine food, serving people in their pursuit of enriching ideas and a fulfilling life. Today's event focuses on the idea of evolutionary psychology. We are very honored to have Professor Pascal Boyer joining us as our featured speaker, Professor Yan Wei as our commentator, and Professor Xu Jing as our moderator. And now I'll pass the mic to the moderator, Dr. Xu Jing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Yuan Yuan, and hi to everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces. I'm happy to see my friends and a lot of new faces. I'm really, really honored to moderate this very exciting conversation. And I'm an anthropologist at the University of Washington in Seattle, and my work explores how humans become moral persons through looking at children in China and across cultures. And I studied in Beijing for many, many years, and then got my PhD in America under the supervision of Professor Boyer. So it is really great to be back in Beijing and introduce Professor Boyer's works to the Chinese audience. Also, it is his first time visiting Beijing as his student. It feels very special to welcome him in this great city. So first of all, let me introduce our speakers. Professor Boyer is the Henry Luce Professor of Anthropology and Psychology at Washington University in St. Louis. He is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the recipient of numerous honors, including the Guggenheim Fellowship and the Thyssen Foundation International Prize. His classic work, Religion Explained, has been translated into 12 languages, and his latest book, Minds Make Societies, has recently been published in Chinese, translated into Chinese by CITIC Press, 新知社会. As Yuan Yuan said, today's event features the field of evolutionary psychology. Professor Boyer is one of the most renowned evolutionary psychologists in the world, so we're very lucky to have him with us today. Our commentator, Professor Yan Fei, is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology at Tsinghua University. His research focused on historical, political, and cultural sociology. He has authored several influential books in Chinese, and is a very, very popular public intellectual in the Chinese world. So I'm going to change references. I think it's more endearing to address Professor Boyer by his first name. That's what I'm more used to. And also Professor Yan Fei, a dear colleague. I will call him Fei instead of Professor Yan. I hope that's okay with everyone. So the procedure of today, we will begin with Pascal's opening remarks on what is evolutionary psychology. This then will be followed by a conversation exploring themes of all kinds related to his book, Minds Make Societies, such as the evolutionary roots of misinformation, of morality, cooperation, and conflict. After that, we'll open the floor for Q&A. For our online audience, please feel free to share your comments and questions in the chat, and our staff will pass them on to our speakers. And for everyone here with us in person, we have a very special treat, a book signing session with our speaker following the Q&A. So let us invite Pascal to start with this talk. I'm gonna give you the prompt. So in your book, Minds Make Societies, you propose a revolutionary perspective for understanding human societies, that our minds are not blank slates, but intricate systems designed by evolution, which has implications for understanding diverse cultural forms. And evolutionary psychology gives us fresh scientific insights into how the human mind was shaped by natural selection and how human culture is not arbitrary or random, but deeply rooted in our natural history. At the same time, however, evolutionary psychology has also been subject to widespread misunderstanding in public discourse. For example, some might argue evolutionary psychology is genetic determinism, and others might say, oh, is it what is natural means what is good? So for Chinese readers who may not be familiar with the concept of evolutionary psychology, could you briefly introduce this field, the book, and your own research? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you very much, and thanks a lot to both CITIC, Bookstore, and the Berggruen Institute for inviting me. This is a privilege to be here in Beijing and address you all. So, my colleague and former student, Jing did a very good job of introducing me, but she made a mistake when she said that it was my theories about those various topics that we're going to hear about. It's actually a collective enterprise that's been going on for about 30 years that tries to explain human cultures and human societies by using what we know about human evolution, about our genetic evolution over the last 500,000 years and more. So what we all try, all the people involved in this enterprise try to elucidate, to explain, is that our minds are really Stone Age minds. They're the minds of people who, of the same kind of the people who 10,000 years ago, around here, were living in Stone Age civilizations, and in many other places in the world, of course. And the minds have not changed much because evolution by natural selection is a very slow process. So 300,000 years of life in groups that are very much like modern groups, that's what has shaped our minds. On the other hand, the last 10,000 years of life in large cities, in great, very large communities and civilizations, this is something that has changed some of the contents of our minds, but not much the operating system, so to speak, of our minds. So that's the main sort of proposition of evolutionary psychology. And the idea is that this can allow us to address all sorts of questions in a new light. And among those questions that are explained in this book, there are things like, why is it so natural for human beings to organize themselves in groups with the in-group and out-group difference? Why is it so natural to bond with our group and develop hostility or rivalry with other groups? Why, after all, don't we all abandon our groups when it's too difficult to maintain solidarity? This is one of those things that is very general to human societies and that we can explain, I think, in evolutionary terms. But another question that's very different is, why are there common features to most of the family structures that we find in different cultures in the world? We know that there are different ways of organizing families, but we also know that there are common features in those different family structures. So, for example, if I told you that there is that place where people get married, but they get married with a fixed term contract. They say, let's get married for 3 years, and then that's it, it's over. You will tell me that's a bit surprising, and I'll tell you, yes, it's a bit surprising, and there is no human society where people do that. Marriage is always open-ended in the future. Why is that? Also, if I told you that there are places where people have children together, but they give them away to other people to look after them. You'd think this is a bit sort of surprising. Well, yes, because parenting, looking after children, is one of the things we associate to sexual unions between people, and that's something that is common to all human societies. Also, another chapter in the book is about economic exchange, and it's kind of interesting that we live in places that have extremely complex economies and economic structures, and yet, in some ways, we still think about those things as if we were in a small village and we were exchanging directly, as if we are bartering, exchanging goods for other goods. And we can see that the way people understand the economy, but also the way people misunderstand the economy, has to do with this illusion that the economy is a bit like a village, but a gigantic one instead of a small one. Finally, I want to talk about conceptions of fairness and justice. And again, this is something that seems to have very complex and different cultural norms in different places. However, it's quite clear that the notion that some forms of exchange are fair or unfair is something that is very common in human societies and something that is very easily understood even by young children at a very early age. If two of us work on something and we put equal amounts of work in it, at the end we have a certain product. How should we divide it? Well, for most human beings, if we put equal amounts of effort, we should split it equally in two equal halves. That's something that's intuitive for children. It is something that is pan-human. It's universal to human beings. But why is it like that? Why does it work like that? Of course, you might think, but it's obvious. It should be like that. That's the only way it should be. But precisely, we think it's the only way it should be because we are human, because we are that species. If we were another species, we may have different ways of thinking about this. So in all those different questions, and there are several others that I talk about in the book, the people who've been doing evolutionary psychology over the last 30 years have been trying to put together three things. One is what we know about human evolution, the last 500,000 years, for example. What kind of communities did we have? What kind of societies did we build? The second thing is, what do we know about the human mind and the way it works from experimental work, from psychology, from neuroscience, and disciplines like that? And the third thing is, what do we know about variations in cultural norms between different places, between different cultures, and between different times? And if we can have those three elements together, do we have a better idea of how human societies in general can be? What is the range of their possibilities? And what is the range of their possible futures as well? That's all. That's all we're trying to do. And, as I told Jing, it's not just me. I'm reporting on a whole variety of researchers in biology, in economics, in psychology, in prehistory, in the study of human prehistory, who converge on these things. Now, some of those ways of thinking are a bit unintuitive or counterintuitive for us. And I think in the discussion with Professor, with Professor Yan, we can, elucidate what are those counterintuitive things? To what extent is this perspective kind of new, or is it just a development of what was been going on in the social sciences for a very long time? And also, quite simply, does it say anything interesting about what we want to understand about modern societies? Or is it just an academic exercise, as we say? All right, so now I should return the microphone to Jing.
Thank you. That is so inspiring. Before we proceed on to more concrete questions, I'm curious about this particular rule that you mentioned in your book, Minds Make Societies. I think it will be very helpful for both social scientists who are not familiar with the evolutionary approach, and for the general public to understand what you mean by this notion that information requires evolved detection. And after that, we can proceed on to the concrete questions. Thank you.
All right. Okay, yes, so this is a very important point, and thank you, Jing, because this is something that often is not very well understood. Okay, there is one thing we all know about human beings, which is that they can acquire enormous amounts of information from the environment, much more than any other species. It's orders of magnitude more than any other species can acquire. So a natural tendency is to think, well, if humans can acquire so much information from their environment, from the social environment, from the natural environment, surely they don't need much knowledge to start with. Because one would go, if you acquire more from the environment, you need less. But actually, it's exactly the opposite of the truth, which is that organisms that learn more from their environment need to have a more complex system to start with. And in order to make that more intuitive, I sometimes compare a cockroach, I hope the translation is correct, a cockroach, a mouse, and a human being. A cockroach is a little disgusting animal that does not learn much from its environment. It can acquire some little routines, but that's it. It doesn't acquire more. A mouse can acquire vastly more information about the environment. It can acquire all sorts of things, like what foods are good, what foods are poisonous, when to expect certain foods, etc. Then take a chimpanzee. A chimpanzee can acquire much more knowledge than a mouse because it can acquire knowledge about society. Because chimpanzees live in societies where there are friendships, where there are alliances, where there are disputes and competition. Now, if you compare those three species, there's one that acquires very little information, one a little bit, and one much more. As it happens, the brain of a cockroach is really minuscule. The brain of a mouse is bigger, and the brain of a chimpanzee is much bigger. And that's because in order to acquire more information from the environment, you need to have a more complex system to start with. Another comparison I take, for example, is between a computer from the 1980s. For many of you, you may not be aware of that, but there were computers in the 1980s, and they could not acquire much knowledge. They could not acquire pictures, for example. They could not acquire sound and things like that. And they had a very small operating system. And computers that we have now can acquire lots of information from the outside because they have a gigantic operating system. And probably in 10 years, the operating system will be even more gigantic. So in general, the species that acquires more from the outside is the one that has more structure to start with. And that's why in human evolution, there is no trade-off that you acquire more, so you need less. On the contrary, because we acquire a lot from our external world, that means we need to have more to start with. So that's a very, very important point.
Thank you very much. So it's really exciting that nature and learning, they're not a good dichotomy to work with. And so I hope we all bear that in mind throughout the rest of the conversation. So now I want to ask this question about the evolutionary roots of, so to speak, misinformation or junk culture, which is an important topic in your book. So from the perspective of evolutionary psychology, what kind of mental designs or adaptive mechanisms makes humans so ready and to accept and spread information that is so strange and weird, and it doesn't make any sense? For example, rumors, conspiracy theories, and the like. For example, I remember clearly in 2016, American 2016 election, there was all kinds of rumors about Hillary Clinton engaging in satanistic rituals of killing babies, so on and so forth. And like, how can a rational human being believe in anything like that and transmit any kind of information like that? So why might mechanisms that once conferred fitness benefits in ancestral environments, now is a kind of a further question, contribute to information pollution in the digital age today?
All right. Well, this is very complex, question. It's not clear that we have the whole answer to that, but it's true that it is a bit of a mystery. That in principle, our cognitive systems should be designed to make us survive in the world better. And you think there is no way to survive in the world better if you're open to completely fake information that has no value. So why would we believe that Hillary Clinton is cutting little babies in pieces in the basement of a pizza restaurant in Washington? Assuming it's not true.
Are we trying to spread?
No one knows. Well, the thing is that the circulation of information in human societies serves two functions. One is, of course, to provide others with useful information. Like, we know that in all simple societies or primitive societies, old people are respected mostly because they have all the knowledge. Because the knowledge of the natural world and the knowledge of technology is something that you acquire by living for a long time. However, there's another role to the transmission of knowledge, which is to give the person who sends knowledge a position, a social status, as someone who gives you very important information. And that is something that is quite different. So, for example, if you move to where I live in the US, and you ask me where to go, buy food, I could tell you, yes, you can go to this store, but do not go to that store because they had they had poisonous fruit or moldy meat or rotten meat and stuff like that. What I'm doing when I give you this information is I am sending you a signal about the world, describing the world, but I'm also sending another signal, which is that I care for you. And I'm sending a third signal, which is that I am a precious resource for you because I am useful to your welfare. So if you want to survive, you'd better pay attention to what I say. So you're giving me status by paying attention to what I say. So there may be contexts in which we try to get that status. I'm a good provider of information without having very useful information. So the thing is that if it's true that there is a restaurant in Washington where the wife of the former president is cutting kids into small pieces to eat them, it's quite important if it's true. So I'm telling you about something about a danger in the world. And I'm sort of implying that what information I have is very important to you, and you should pay attention to what I say. So I think very often this is what happens in social media, where we transmit some sort of absurd theory. And we transmit that theory not because some people who transmit them don't really think they're true, but they think that they're important and salient. So it gives me a sort of status as an information provider of some importance. That's the main sort of reason.
Thank you. That's such an interesting perspective. Now I want to turn to Professor Yanfei. From a sociological perspective, in terms of the spreading of rumor and low-value information, what kinds of social conditions particularly nurture this kind of transmission? Is it about declining trust or lack of transparency, regulation, or other factors?
Okay, thank you so much for the invitation. I have attended many public events in the past few years, but this is my first time to attend the event and to present my ideas in English. So I will try my best to present it so that you could understand my meaning. So my training is from sociology background. So in the past 25 years, I've been teaching, researching, and supervising students within sociology area. So I'm really a beginner to try to understand what is evolutionary psychology. So my understanding in the past 25 years academic training is that we emphasize a lot of things outside of society, that is like institutions, structures, systems, and the belief system, and so on and so forth. And those things like social structures, institutions, and systems that shape how human beings behave. But from Boyer's evolutionary psychology, I think he emphasized that the roots of social life actually start inside the human mind. And our feelings of morality, fairness, and you just mentioned fairness and justice, and also the trust, right? And you ask, so what is the major reason for the rumor and the misinformation? Maybe it is from the distrust. And I will talk about the distrust and the crisis of trust later, but I still would like to add a few comments on the evolutionary psychology versus sociology. So you show that our feelings of morality, fairness, justice, and trust, and also the group belonging, they actually are not just made up by culture. And from the sociological points, and we argue that all kind of those stuffs are actually the cultural products. So from Boyer's argument, those moralities, they come from deep human instinct that evolved to help us live and cooperate with others. So basically, nature gave us the basic emotions and the ways of thinking, but society turns them into moral codes and shared values. So from a sociological point of view, I think this is a very provocative idea, because it means that the culture and the society, they don't just shape us from zero. And we already come with some kind of certain ways of thinking and feeling that society builds on. And in other words, our institutions and belief systems, they don't create morality or solidarity from scratch. They shape and sometimes even twist the human instinct that evolution has already given us. So, but at the same time, I think sociology still play a very important role to have a dialogue with evolutionary psychology and a very important layer to Boyer's argument. So once those basic human instinct and the ways of thinking enter society, they start to take shape through our institutions, belief system, and the social structures, and what we call moral feelings like disgust. And I will talk about what do you mean disgust at a later stage. Like disgust, fairness, or trust, they don't come with fixed meanings. They are actually taught and reinforced by our cultural system. And let's talk about rumor. So what is rumor? And from the evolutionary psychology, rumor is kind of some basic human instinct. But from the sociological point of view, I think rumors increase in societies where we have a kind of crisis of trust. So where trust, transparency, and stability begin to erode. So when people lose faith in official institutions, so when I call it official institutions such as the government, the policy, our belief system, the cultural system, and also the media we consume. So every day we spend a lot of time on WeChat, TikTok, Douyin, and Kuaishou, and Xiaohongshu, or even science, because today, right, it is Yang Zhening passed away, right? So some other people will lose faith because a child scientist, he passed away, and we will enter into an AI period. So when people lose faith in official institutions, they started to rely more on informal channels to make sense of uncertainty. So rumors in that sense are not simply the false information or the so-called information pollution, but actually the rumors are social product that fill the gap left by weak or distrusted institutions. So I would like to emphasize here that rumors is not coming from individual irrationality, but rumor is more like a symptom of a society struggling to re-establish coherence when its normal channels of truth have collapsed. So when I talk about the normal channels of truth, what did I mean? So I would like to try to emphasize that, or maybe quote a sentence that is, a healthy society should have voices from the different parts of the communities. So we should have the multiple sources of voices instead of just have one dominant voice. I still remember that a few years ago here, whenever something happened in public life, there were open debates, open discussions, and lively discussions. But today, most of those honest and critical conversations have just disappeared. And many scholars and public intellectuals and public thinkers, they do not dare to speak out, or they just choose to stay silent because they are afraid of saying something wrong. So today here we have too much censorship, and we have too much self-censorship. So when no one dares to speak openly, that silence will create space for rumors to grow. So this is my point from a sociological view. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yanfei. I think it's really, the conversation is getting really interesting. The sort of, chemistry between sociological, social science perspectives and evolutionary perspectives. And I would, from my own training, one of my research focuses on social learning is basically how humans learn from social sources, right? From social media, from your relatives, family, teachers. And there are like two kinds of biases, right? Source biases is what Yanfei was talking about. What kind of sources do you trust? And the other thing that I want to bring up and also ask a question to Pascal is content bias. So are there, from a psychological evolutionary psychology perspective, are there particular kinds of information that naturally draw more attention from humans? And I ask that because you mentioned in the examples you gave about poisonous food and food that had grew mold, 长霉菌的, and that sort of example is really illustrative. And also in psychology, there's a thing called negativity bias, right? That as if humans are kind of naturally paying more attention to negative information, including emotion. But is that true? Do we have some general negativity bias? Or are there more domain-specific content bias?
All right, thank you. This is an important and difficult question. And I think, Professor Yang was totally correct. And I think the two perspectives have to be combined if we want to understand any specific social phenomenon. And that's the thing that we can say, well, there's a disposition in humans to try to get credit for information that is surprising, important, etc. But under what conditions is that bias or that motivation likely to find expression? Well, not always, not all the time, and not in all forms. And of course, that's why if you want to understand a special historical period or a special sort of local culture, you have to have those two perspectives, combined and articulated with each other. Now, for the question of content biases, it's true that it seems that human minds are disposed to believe negative information more than positive information. And there is a very simple and spectacular experimental demonstration of that, which is that if you give people all sorts of statements about things they don't really know, and you ask them, do you think this is true or this is false? To sum up this experiment in a very simple way, you could tell people that any person, people who've had a heart attack, 10% of them will die in the next 5 years. Or you could tell them that people who've had a heart attack, 90% of them will survive in the next 5 years. Well, people find the first information more true, more likely to be true than the second one. Of course, in the experimental thing, you don't put the two sentences in the same space because people would immediately see that they are the same information. You put some, all sorts of distractors in the thing. But it's spectacular that we have this sort of tendency that information that is negative is more arresting. But why is it arresting? It's not really because it's negative. It's mostly because it's about threats, about things that are threatening in our social and natural environment. And if I tell you that the supermarket over there sells very bad meat, what I'm telling you is that there's a source of danger in the environment. We have run experiments where we have exactly that, a comparison between someone who tells you this supermarket sells rotten meat and this one, nothing special about them. And people think that the person who told you about the rotten meat is more knowledgeable. What they say is more likely to be true if they told you about a threat. So first, then we thought, well, maybe it's just because it's negative. But no, because if I have a comparison between one person says this supermarket sells rotten meat, and another person says that supermarket, they exploit people and they don't pay them at all, and they're very cruel to their employees. That's also negative. But people don't seem to remember that second statement, and they don't seem to think that the source is very credible. So the source of threat information is very credible. And one reason for that is very simple, which is that the point about threat information is that if you receive it, you should not try to test whether it's true or not. If I tell you that outside these curtains, there's a tiger, because at CITIC they have tigers, then you will not try to get through those. You will stay here. So by doing that, you will make it more credible, and everyone else will think that must be true because look, everyone is staying in the room. So, and just to finish on this question, it's an interesting question because in many cultures in the world, you have very strange prohibitions, superstitions, and I'm sure you have tons of them here. So in Southern Europe, for example, if the first person you see during the day is a Catholic priest, then your day will be very bad. Okay. And it is so strong that some people, if they get out of bed and they see a Catholic priest, will go back to bed so that they can start the day again. Okay. So we also have things like, do not walk under a ladder, do not open an umbrella inside a house, otherwise. But that's the thing. Otherwise what? We don't know, but we'd rather not do it because it's information about a threat, so therefore we don't do it. And I think lots of those content biases are like that. Sorry.
I also would like to add some points on the content bias. So I'm thinking about how people respond to the same content, but under the different cultural scenarios. And I would like to share you a story, and because I'm a sociologist. As a sociologist, people usually started to tell stories, because we are a storyteller. So during the pandemic, a few years ago, actually 2 to 3 years ago, at the end of the pandemic, and I with my friend, and we try to do something very interesting, because I'm also very deeply engaged in the so-called SEA, the socially engaged arts. So we try to do a social experiment. That is, we went to the street and gave people flowers for free. So it is quite you can understand that during the pandemic, the whole society is under high stress. So it is in a cultural unstable scenario. So under that specific context, so we would like to give people, we don't know, the random people on the street, we give them flower for free as a way to give them support, to give them encouragement, which I think, we are so good, we are doing very good thing. But guess how the elderly people respond to our great gesture. So a lot of people, actually majority of people, they refuse our good view, and they question, why you give me a flower for free? You want to make profit? Or maybe you try to get our private information, such as the WeChat account, so that in the future you will scan a QR code and try to get my privacy. And at that point, every people is so doubt, is so suspicious with each other, and there's no trust, and the social distance, the intimate distance between people are so far away. So this is the under the cultural unstable scenario. So when the whole society is under stress, such as the pandemic, political crisis, or environment downturn, I believe fear makes rumors spread faster. And in moments like that, people want answers and a sense of control, and they want emotional relief and social belonging. So therefore, sharing rumors will become a way to return to a sense of control and a solidarity, especially group solidarity, even if that content is biased, is inaccurate. That's my point. Thanks.
Thank you very much to both of you. I want to ask a question that is related to how humans receive and interpret information, kind of more getting into the cognitive mechanisms behind how we process information. So there seems to be a paradox. When you mentioned the example of there's a tiger lurking, I was immediately alert because maybe there's a tiger, who knows, and the risk is really high. But then we also have this legend, right? Even every child knows, 狼来了. So if you say that the wolf is coming, for once, everybody believes in you. But then if you say it 3 times and nothing happens, then people understand it's a lie. So what I want to say is that we have research showing that humans have epistemic vigilance, right? We do distinguish information, the sources and the quality and all that, towards more suspicious information. But then why do these mechanisms fail in the face of like false ideas or strange ideas, including pseudoscience, mass delusion, and things like that? And how do evolutionary psychologists explain this apparent paradox, the coexistence of human gullibility and also epistemic vigilance?
Okay. Well, that is a bit of a difficult question because there's still lots of research on those things, especially on children. Children are not easily fooled. And that's why I think I mentioned in the book that parents throughout the world try to convince their children that green vegetables are very good for you. And no matter how many times you say it, children just don't believe it. And in a way, they're right not to believe it because they don't really need those vitamins as much as we do, we adults. They need much more carbohydrates and things like that. But we also know that people have epistemic vigilance. That is a way to make sure that they reject information that's not useful and accept information that's useful. Because any excess in any direction could be very bad. If you always believe what people tell you, you'll be in a very bad situation. But if you never believe anyone people tell you, you will be eaten by the tiger that is actually over there. So we have to maintain a balance between being gullible, that is accepting information and rejecting information. And it's a very subtle sort of thing. It seems that young children know how to do that. Now, it seems also that in many cases, people who spread some kinds of misinformation are not actually sure that it's true. And they spread it mostly to bond with other people, to realize some sort of social links with other people. And that's why in situations like, the one that Professor Yan mentioned, in a situation of general social stress, you would be more prone to spread information that is of low value. Why? Because first of all, you have to get some precious information about the fact that people believe you or trust you enough to believe what you say, but also you're in a situation of very poor information, actually. Like we have a virus, we don't know what's going to happen. And so it's in a way a sort of flaw in the system, but it's a flaw in the system because if you have very low information about the situation, why not pay attention to what others say about it? Because they might have some good information. But in general, it's true, we're not gullible, like believing everything. We are gullible about one thing, which is that we think that other people are gullible. We're gullible about that because, in fact, they're not gullible either. But we think, I have my ideas because I thought about a problem. The others, they just opened their mind and any garbage fell into their minds and now they believe it. But that's not true. And we know from everyday experience, not just that, children don't want to eat green things, but think of simple situations like, if you meet someone and you want to convince them that you are a fantastic romantic partner, you don't just say, I am a fantastic romantic partner. Come and live with me. That is the least convincing statement in the world. No one will believe that. Because people have a certain notion of the risks of over-believing in that situation. So I think it's not so much a defect of the system. It's more that the system, once it's put in very special conditions, which are historically special, can lend to this, this kind of acceptance of weird information. But I'm sure Professor Yan has more to say about this.
Yeah, actually, Pascal, I really like the idea you propose as epistemic vigilance toward suspicious information. So in my idea, you're not a reporter here to report the latest development in evolutionary psychology field. You're really a master builder of this field. But I'm sorry, I have to emphasize the systems, institution, the structure all the time because it is so boring to be a sociologist because in the past 25 years, every single student of mine, they started to emphasize structure, belief, system, field, tension all the time, and also the sociological imagination. I will mention that point at the end of our conversation. I'm sorry, I have to emphasize many times this afternoon. But still, as from a sociological point of view, I believe vigilance, people's vigilance, is more depends on social context. So who is speaking and how authority is structured and what emotional needs are at stake. And also, when you talk about vigilance, I would like to relate this concept to people's belonging and people's group identities. So it is even sometimes when we believe in certain ideas, even those wrong ideas and absurd ideas, can actually be a way to show loyalty to a group instead of finding the truth. Because we don't judge information in isolation, especially in the modern, large and complex societies. So for the ordinary people, they do so within the so-called network of trust, including our family members, the peer groups, even the online WeChat groups. I believe every people has a lot of different kind of WeChat groups. And when these networks become small bubbles, when people trapped within those small bubbles, they just hear very similar views and voices. So at that point, social belongings can become more important than individual critical judgment. So even those ideas are wrong, even those ideas are so suspicious. But if you choose to believe in those ideas, it is a way to show you loyalty to a group and show you social belongings. So from a sociological view, belief is not always about being what is right, what is wrong. Belief is about to show your group identity, to support your group solidarity, and so on and so forth. So I believe who to doubt and who to believe are learned through our cultural and the power relations, and we have to put the individual scenario, their decision models within the network of trust. That's my point.
That's quite, yeah.
Thank you so much. It just reminded me the example Yan Fei 老师 gave about good gestures, sending flowers, but then people were suspicious. And it's just very interesting. It just reminds me of the concept which social scientists might not be very familiar with, a theory of mind, right? So we humans, we naturally want to interpret other people's intentions, mental states. From the behavior is the only observable thing, but then we cannot help but trying to interpret, infer the underlying motive, intentions. So I think your example is just brilliant. Many children do that too. They infer mental states. And the reason I want to mention that is I would like to expand.
By the way, so because it is us, stand on the street, try to give the flowers to the people we don't know.
Strangers.
So if you stand on the street, try to give the flowers to other people, I believe the chance they accept the flowers will be much higher. And for us, the chance is pretty low, and even lower for you. It's much lower. And if a child is standing on the street, try to give the flowers, they will buy the flowers. Even the child give the flowers free, but other people will buy. Will buy with their pocket money. So it is the level of trust is quite different, even within the different cultural scenarios. That is so interesting. So I love observing society so much because there's a lot of different angles to dig deep into the core elements, the core essence of what is society. So this is, sorry, I interrupted you.
Thank you so much. And so we use all kinds of cues to interpret human intention, mental states, their beliefs, desires, and so on and so forth. And also we use labels, right? The stereotypes or whatnot. We use labels to give a fast track to do that interpretation. But I wanted to emphasize that example, and also you mentioned the signaling, right? We do that not just to spread information, but also to signal we are a member of this particular group, especially when there is conflict or resource scarcity and things like that. So you mentioned a very important dimension, which is group dynamics, which is so essential to human societies throughout history. So I wanted to expand discussion and to ask Pascal this very fundamental question and also a paradox of being human. On the one hand, we seem to be naturally cooperative. Humans were able to build large-scale societies and cooperation and coordination, all that, including groups and identity and group membership and group solidarity. But on the other hand, there's also a lot of intergroup conflict. So how do you explain this paradox or duality? And do you think humans are by nature tribal animals, or that is actually a misunderstanding?
Well, I think it's maybe partly a misunderstanding. And but by the way, before I answer, I'm intrigued by the experiment that Professor Fan just suggested, and we should try it after this discussion. Sit on the corner, and there would be a flower offered by a young woman, by a distinguished professor, and by a foreign devil, and we'll see who accepts the flower. Incidentally, one thing that is interesting about us living in a market economy is that we don't believe in free things. And there's been lots of experiments on American campuses where the student association, for example, sells cookies. Cookies usually are $1. So they sell that for $0.25. Lots of people buy them. If they give them for free, people don't take them. They think there must be something behind it. Just exactly like what Xianfei was just describing. What is your intention? And that's exactly what you said. You know, you have a behavior that seems to be a bit strange, that you give me a flower, but I'm not your fiancé, I'm not your, your mother, and you give me a flower. This man must need something. He's after something. I think in terms of the groups and being tribal and all that, those things that we see as opposite things are, of course, two sides of the same coin. That is, it is because we have extreme solidarity in groups, and we can build groups that are of high solidarity with collective action. That is, we pool our efforts together in order to achieve results, and we share the results. But that has a counterpart, which is that we have to have trust with the other participants in that kind of operation. Now, if someone is an individual with whom we've had relations before, we have some sort of way of estimating how much we can trust them. Extending this a bit, if we are told by our social environment that this person is of the same group as you and me, then we have an index that trust is better. But the problem is that there are no indices of this kind that go further than that kind of community. So once you have groups in which there is high solidarity, you have a high potential for conflict between groups, especially because they are of high solidarity. Solidarity is something that we can have, but we cannot extend very easily unless we have institutions that do it for us. And institutions are a way of expanding our circle of trust. But without institutions that do it, our circle of trust is bound to remain very small, very parochial, and very confined to the group we actually know. So once again, it's a way of saying that if you want to study to what extent there is intergroup conflict, you have to take into account the institutions that convey that trust, the labels that convey this level of trust. And without that, you cannot understand the way the system works inside the mind of the person. But I think, Professor.
Yeah, Pascal, I really like your point that you emphasize that in free economy, people, they don't trust the free and they depend on the judgment on the different kinds of labor. But we can see that in early human communities, cooperation and reciprocity they are so vital, and in Polanyi's the classic word, the Great Transformation, he put a lot of emphasis on the importance of reciprocity in early human communities, and during that period, we have some basic moral institutions such as the feelings of disgust, fearless, loyalty, or anger. And those kind of moral emotions, they are more like a quick alarm. Like, for example, disgust will help avoid contamination or betrayal. Fearless will foster trust and punish free riders. But today, because we are living in a modern world and we meet all kinds of different people every day, so sometimes I think we respond just to very simple social signs instead of to have a critical judgment or very deep structural understanding. So instead of seeing the bigger picture, people often end up blaming individuals based on their different kinds of labor. So when we talk about labor, I would like to take disgust as a case to have further discussions. So every society will teach us who deserves sympathy and who deserves blame. So disgust in that scenario is not only about biology, it's not only biological, it is learned through our culture, it is through the socialization process. And sometimes we can put the different labors in different social groups, such as for those migrant people working in the remote areas in Beijing. we will put those people with a label dirty, dangerous. They are not human. They are from the low skilled population, 低端人口, right? So even in, you can't believe this, Pastor, I tell you, you can't believe it. So in Beijing, in the official policy document in in Beijing government, they put 低端人口, low skilled population, affiliate this label with migrant people, and they try to throw those people away from Beijing as to show they have a great ambition to establish Beijing as a great international city. But let's have some memory back to 2008. So when Beijing started to organize the Olympics in 2008, there's a slogan, "Hello world, welcome to Beijing." So which literally means every people, including those disadvantaged and underprivileged social group, welcome to Beijing, and you could enjoy some kind of equal education, equal medical benefits, and so on and so forth. So once emotions like disgust get attached to labels, and the labels get attached to identity, plus like the race, class, gender, religion, so group boundaries will become harder and harder to break. So when group boundaries become harder to break, people stop seeing each other as individuals and start seeing only the different labels. So the labels becomes us versus them. The high-profile people versus low-profile people, the local people versus the foreigner people, and so on, so forth. So the foreigner people, unfortunately, in the current scenario, sometimes they were treated like spy, right? So those boundaries often feed on fear and misunderstanding. So the more divided people feel, the more they will rely their judgment on stereotypes, and the less they are willing to listen to other people. So my whole point, my point sounds like a little bit pessimistic, but I would like to give some optimistic future, because sociology tells us that the boundaries between us and them, between the different peoples, they are not permanent. They are built through history, power, and the culture, and anything built can also be changed because it is built by humans. So I believe when people share the experience, cooperation, we simply tell their stories from a different kind of angle. So, and those boundaries can be softened. It's a slow work, but we still have future if we hold our hope and hold our optimistic. So this is my point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, because this is a very, very important point, and it's something that we're trying to understand both from a psychological and a sort of historical viewpoint, is treatment of other groups. And one thing that is kind of interesting that comes from social psychology is a result that is quite common, which is that, people differ. People have individual differences in terms of how sensitive they are to contagion and disgust. There are some people who, if they see me hold the pen like this, will not want to touch that pen because who knows, I've put some germs on it or things like that. There are people who don't care. There are people who share a glass with someone else. There are people. So there is a lot of difference between people. Well, that difference between people in terms of contagion sensitivity seems to have an effect on their conception of migrants in the US, in the United States. And the ones, as you can predict, the ones who are more sensitive to contagion and danger tend to easily use the label that is provided by society that those migrants are a source of danger, and they immediately think that those migrants will bring disease as well as other social problems. So it's, and it's kind of interesting that, as you say, sometimes the political institutions try to get rid of these situations by pushing people out. And it's not just something that happens here, because 2 years ago in San Francisco is a city that is wonderful but has lots of problems, of lots of homeless people, drug addicts, people with mental problems, etc., in the streets, getting drugged out of their minds and stuff like that. It's turned the local society is really stressed by that, because it's a really annoying problem. But 2 years ago, the Chinese President Xi, came over to San Francisco, and the San Francisco municipality got rid of all those people
Right.
and put them outside.
In just one single day.
Yes, in one single day they were gone. And in the local newspaper in San Francisco, they said, could we elect President Xi mayor of San Francisco? Because he seems to be a miracle worker who can do in one day what no one else could do in years. It's comical, but it's tragic that the only way, the authorities take this problem seriously is when they're scared that they could lose face by having the foreign president come over. So I think you're quite right that this use of labels and disgust is sometimes very strategic. Some political operators will use it, some political movements will use it, and it's very dangerous because it's one of the easiest things to acquire for human beings. The idea that another group is a source of danger, contagion, dirt, threat. So unfortunately, that's the human material we'll deal with. So we have to and it's not very easy to find the weapon against that. And I'm not sure psychology could tell you what the weapon is. Maybe sociologists can, and I hope they can, because we can't.
By the way, I also would like to add one interesting point, because when we talk about the disgust, or maybe other label, I think there's a generational gap. For example, and for people like in our age, we trust the college professors so much. So for example, if two of us stand in front of audience, so people will have deeper trust of you because you are more senior, right? But for the younger generation, they do not trust the so-called authority, such as the college professors or the government officers. They are more likely to trust some YouTuber, some K-pop star YouTuber. Because my son he's 8 years old, and he watches the YouTube all the time. And his favorite YouTuber is Mr. Beast, and he doesn't like actual speed. So Mr. Beast, so whatever Mr. Beast speak, he will trust Mr. Beast at low cost. He also becomes a fan of his product. He sold the Spider-Man's tour and the toys, and he also has his own brand chocolate. So he bought a lot of Mr. Beast chocolate, and I believe that kind of chocolate is much better. It's much better than Godiva, but for people like in my age, we love Godiva all the time, right? So when I get married, I gave Godiva as a gift to my wife, to my girlfriend. She hasn't become my wife at that point. So my point is that so we have, yes, we do see a lot of labels, but the different generations they will have, they will show the different level of trust to those labels, even to the same label.
Very good.
Thank you. This conversation is so interesting. And Yanfei, your example, I have to say your son is very smart, because I have a lot of respect for YouTubers, because I don't think it's easy to become a successful YouTuber and to give, and
by the way, his career goal at this point, he would like to become a YouTuber. But a few years ago, to be more specific, 4 to 5 years ago, his career goal was to become a security guard.
Right.
Because during the pandemic, he saw how powerful security guard can be.
Yes.
Yeah.
So his whole judgment could be changed by the different scenarios. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So I believe it is not only about the basic human instinct, basic
it's
human
really
morality. It was shaped by
Yeah.
By
the
situation,
social
yeah.
environment, the situation, right?
That's good.
Yeah, we should compare notes after the event because my son started wanting to become a firefighter. Maybe it's a similar thing, it's a comparable role to safety guard, security guard in China because firefighters in America, they're so admirable, right? They are the heroes. And then later he wanted to become a YouTuber because he thinks it's so easy to get 1 million subscribers just right away. And he told me that you will just get money automatically if you post stuff on the YouTube and you get subscribers. So it just reminded me of that example. And I wanted to come back to this question of moral emotion, specifically disgust. And I would like to ask Pascal, from an evolutionary psychology perspective, what was the origin of the moral emotion of disgust?
Well, from an evolutionary point of view, disgust is not initially a moral emotion. It's more an emotion of aversion towards things that happen to convey or carry danger of contamination or danger of contagion. And it's no surprise that if you want to think of what would be the most disgusting things that could be on this table, and I will not give example, I will leave it to your imagination, it turns out that those things are products, and are bodily products very often, that happen to be highly dangerous for us because they carry germs. And we also have there's an element of our intuitive, evolved response to that, which is kind of important because it's interesting, which is that we have, there is no dose effect. That is, the dose effect is the idea that if I give you a medicine and I give you twice as much of the medicine, I expect twice as much of the effect. And, for example, you have a headache and I give you aspirin or ibuprofen or something like that. If you still have a bit of a headache, you may take a bit more. So the dose is proportional to the effect. Now, take another situation where there is no dose effect. Imagine I'm cooking a stew for you, and I've put all sorts of ingredients in it, and it's really delicious. And I tell you that, yes, at some point I was leaning over, and my spit, a few drops of my saliva got into the stew. You will be like, wow, I'm not eating from that. And then I tell you, but it's a tiny dose. It's only a few drops. Why this reaction? And there is a profound evolutionary reason why we have this reaction, which is that disgust is there to protect us against germs, and germs multiply. So it doesn't matter if I give you a tiny dose of the flu, you could get the flu. And if I get you half of that dose of that number of viruses of the flu, you could still get the flu. So for contagion and infection, there is no dose effect. And that is an interesting thing. So it seems to show that our intuitions of disgust is mostly about that. However, they then get exploited for many other situations. And it's interesting that for human beings, it's extremely easy to elicit the emotion of disgust about moral situations. This boy was well treated by his mother, she looked after him, etc. So what did he do? He beat her, stole her money, and ran away. No one can read that story without having a feeling that is a bit like eating rotten meat. It's a little bit of aversion. And to this day, we know that this is very powerful socially, this exploitation of the disgust emotion by moral situations, but we don't really know how it happens, why it happens. But what we know is that it's socially very important. Like Professor Jans just said, what do you say when you want to exclude those some groups, some poor people, for example? You say they're dirty, you know, they don't wash, they carry diseases, they have weird practices that are kind of physically disgusting. So we don't know how these two go together and why, but we know that they do, and that it's a powerful social phenomenon when people exploit this notion.
Thank you. Also, in the conversation earlier, both of you touched upon this issue of victim blame, right? Yanfei was talking about when disadvantaged people, they were thought as undeserving. And Pascal, I know that your newest research also, you did experiments and looking into this phenomenon. Why would people blame victims of misfortune? So can you tell us why?
Well, I'm not sure I have the answer why, but we have done some experiments to try and understand. It's true. Think of any situation of misfortune. You go out in the street, and I don't know, you slip on something in the street, you trip up and you fall and you break your arm. If you tell this story to people, many people will have the immediate reaction to be, well, it's your fault. You should have looked before you were walking on things. You should have done something differently. And it's a very strange reaction in a way, because what does it do to say that? What does it do for us, for you, I will not spend my whole life looking down at the sidewalk when I'm walking. So I can't really follow this advice. You don't do it either. So you can't really sort of give me that piece of advice. One possibility is that anyone who has a misfortune, an accident, when they tell you about it, is implicitly asking for your support. But the problem is that support is a good that is limited. You can't support everyone all the time. So we have a sort of defense reaction, which is to say, well, what happened to you is partly your responsibility, so you should take some of the cost, and I can't be responsible for the entire cost. Now, you could say, well, there are exceptional situations where you cannot really tell people that it's their fault. And I thought about that because I saw a very, very funny video. I mean, funny, it's kind of tragic, which was someone, it's in the middle of a storm, there's a lake, and there's someone, and a very severe storm with lightning in the sky everywhere. And there's a fellow who comes out and goes fishing in the lake with a very long line, metal line and stuff. And sure enough, the lightning strikes him. Okay. You think, okay, poor guy, that's not his fault. But then what you see, what is extraordinary, is that the guy is just shaken like this. And what does he do? He goes back into the water with his line. And again, the lightning strikes. And it's difficult not to think, you know what? God gave you a warning, but it's your fault you ignored it. So now it's on you. I'm not going to help someone who does that. I think that's got to do with our collaboration and cooperation. We have to cooperate with each other. We have an obligation to support people. So if you slip on the pavement, in a way, there could be a cost that you will need to be helped. You will need some support. You will need food to be brought to your place because you can't walk anymore. So all these things go through our minds very quickly, and we tend to think, hang on a minute, maybe not so much support. And I think that's why there's, now that I've been doing research on that, I'm incredibly surprised by how natural it is. If people say, I lost my job, immediately people in their social environment will think, well, you didn't behave very well in your job. You were not very nice. you must have offended someone, etc. They go through all these ideas without any evidence. And I think it's mostly because they're trying to say the responsibility for all this should not be just on my shoulders, it should be also on yours. But that's a hypothesis. I'm not sure it's true. The experiments support it, but that doesn't mean that it's true. It just means that it's less likely that it's false. So that's where we are at the moment for that. But that also, and that's why I want Professor Yan to tell us more about that, because that works, of course, for groups. You know, why is that group of people from a certain ethnic group more, poorer, less successful in our society? Well, surely it's because they do something that is wrong that justifies that. Because otherwise, if it's not because of that, then we have to justify why do we create injustice. So I'd like to know what you have to say about that.
You moved to how we form group and how we belong to the group, but I also would like to go back to Xu Jing's question on blaming individuals, just a few sentences on that. Because usually people usually often end up blaming individuals because, as I said, they respond to simple social signs, and at that point, I think we have a common argument. So, for example, someone might think a poor person, because why he's poor, because he didn't work hard enough.
Yeah.
Instead of asking how inequality or unfair the whole system create poverty in the first place. So
Sure, yeah.
I think in that point we have a lot of in common. And you also mentioned people have obligation to support other people and join a group. So I'm so curious about what do you mean by obligation? Is that when you talk about obligation, is that obligation is equal to the basic human instinct,
Yes,
the moral
exactly.
institution,
Yes, yeah.
or maybe the obligation is it's also socially and
sure.
culturally, socially learned and culturally adaptive. So I believe, of course, everyone has the individual has a basic human instinct, that is we have to belong to a specific social group, and we have to defend that social group. But sometimes when you talk about obligation, I would like to extend obligation a little bit more, not only based on cooperation. Yeah, of course, people love to cooperate with other people, but I would like to talk about how people selectively cooperate
Yeah, of
with
course.
each other. So it is not only it is not only cooperation, it is a selective cooperation. So that question is also related to a very simple question: who belong to us? Who belong to us?
Who is us?
Yeah, who is us? So recently, the most fashionable and popular discussion in that field is about identity politics, right? The MAGA is MAGA, Harvard is Harvard.
Yeah.
So those two people are quite different because they hold the different identities. So today, identity politics has become one of the main ways people form groups and make sense of belonging, and people gather around shared identities such as gender, race, nature, belief, religion, and so on and so forth. And they look for recognition and protection. But at the same time, these identities can also become a source of division. So when different peoples, they feel their values or experience are not respected, they may fight with each other, and even and each claiming to represent the true voice of justice, the true voice of fairness and truth, or the real people, the real believer. So I believe the fight wasn't just about politics. It was about belonging, social belonging, about who had the right to defend what being revolutionary truly meant. And I believe this kind of phenomena unique to a very specific historical period. It's not unique to that moment. the same pattern also appears in many societies. What happened in the US at this point is also show the same social pattern. So I believe when moral conviction and group identity mixed, solidarity can easily turn into division. So this is my point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That also raises, I have a curious question because I attended one session of your great course, Psychological Anthropology of Moral Crusades. So yeah, it is puzzling, and I've been observing American politics. It's getting really absurd. The two sides getting more extreme and also moralizing. That's kind of what puzzles me and interests me as somebody who studies morality. So how do I explain the sort of moralization in identity politics and what you call moral crusade, which, as Yan Fei said, is not unique to one context or time period. It's quite universal.
No, that's right. And the tendency to create what we call polarization is often accompanied by this moralization of debates. That is, the other side is not wrong about what they say. They're morally wrong. They're, evil to support what they support. I think it's quite clear in the US that it's become very much like that and it's intensified. But in a way, both sides start to moralize their opinion, their political programs, because they see themselves as losing authority, losing ground. Political parties, traditional political parties in the US are not quite as influential as they used to be. Newspapers are not influential at all because social media have kind of replaced them. All those people, I think it's a sort of social dynamic, but I'm not a sociologist, so I will not sort of risk making claims about that. I think there's a social dynamic whereby if a sort of organization loses its authority, one way in which it can try to gain more influence is to hyper-moralize all the terms of the debate and say that it's not that we are factually correct about what should be done, it's that it's the only moral position. It may be because of that, I don't know, but I think it's quite clear that a traditional source of authority in the sense of authority that is giving truth, guaranteeing a certain message, are really disappearing in the US and in Western Europe as well. And the movements that used to be the carriers of authoritative information become more extreme. But I'm not sure it's always the case. So that's a historical question that is very delicate because societies are not really like clockwork mechanics. So you can't really sort of say that if you have one situation, you have one result. It's not as simple as that.
Yeah, I would like to add one question on polarization, and you talked about polarization. So that's true. It is totally true that today's society is much deeply divided than we imagine. But I would like to ask if it is possible for one single people who join both MAGA and the anti-Trump demonstration at the same time. Is that possible? So I'm thinking about maybe we have the third pattern that is opportunistic, opportunistic, 机会主义者, okay, sorry, yeah, opportunist. So people try to avoid losing on that track, and they would like to they survive in that during that turbulent period. So maybe joining both sides would guarantee the maximum profit and interest of this specific individual. So this is my
that sounds
thoughts.
relevant.
Yeah, and since we talk about all kinds of issues that seem to be related to what we call broadly morality, and morality is also at the center of Chinese thought, and it's also very key to understanding contemporary social life. Can you, both of you, say briefly your understanding of the origins of morality? Or do you think there are kind of I also said morality, but do you think there are universals of moralities? And how do universal moralities then give rise to all kinds of diverse moral beliefs and practices?
Well, I must say I'm not absolutely sure that there are such diverse moral beliefs in a sense, because it seems to me that moral reflections about what is appropriate, what is wrong, etc., seem to be one of the easiest to acquire from another culture. So, of course, there are codes, like in the place where I did fieldwork in Central Africa. If I go see a very respected person, like an old person, what I would do when I enter their house and see them will be to sit on their knees in their lap, which seems very strange. Why would you do that? It's a sign of respect because it conveys the impression, I am just a child compared to you. So I give you respect by sitting. And I've been in lots of occasions where I was me and there was an old lady who was so small and so fragile that I thought if I sit on her, she will just collapse. So I tried to sort of mimic it and not do it for real. But people were happy that I did that because it shows something. So this is a sign that is very exotic for me arriving in that society. I have no idea. When people told me, no, sit on her lap, I thought, this is so strange. However, there's reverence for someone who's been around for a long time, and who should defer to who is the young to the old. Also, the less knowledgeable to the more knowledgeable. So all these things are things that are so easy to acquire because they probably rely on some psychological, system that is quite normal to human beings, which is that there is a hierarchy of moral rights and duties, and you must express it. Now, of course, you have to learn the local codes, because I'm sure if you try sitting on people's lap in China or in America, that's not going to work. Okay, so again, we should do experiments.
Yeah, sure. I totally agree with you, Pascal. I'm so happy that today here we are still able to discuss what is the origins of humans' morality.
Yeah.
I just finished a seminar this morning, and I have dialogue with a lot of experts in AI area. And people talk about when AI has morality and has emotions, how we as human beings respond to advanced and highly developed AI. So happy we're still human here, and we talk about humanity, and we talk about morality and humanity. So I believe morality grows out of both biology and society, and morality only becomes real only through the ordinary and the real social life. Morality is rooted in biology, of course, from the evolutionary psychology perspective. Its meaning and reach from the sociological view are ultimately socially constructed and historically shaped.
Thank you so much. It reminds me of a scene that my friend's son, before the event started, he came here to ask you to sign the book. He naturally sat on your lap. It was so cute. It was like very easy to acquire without thinking. Yeah. Well,
I think he just thought I'm a nice person. That doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So before we move on to Q&A, I want both of you to quickly summarize and kind of give us advice, given that we talk about so many pessimistic issues, moral disgust and things like that, which are rooted in deep natural history of human evolution. But how can we, realistically speaking, living in contemporary world, are there sort of strategies, education, training, exercises we can do to sort of help us partially overcome those kind of evolved intuitions or build upon those evolved intuitions in order to sort of facilitate wiser forms of cooperation. Because at the end of the day, we are living in large-scale modern society.
All right, so I don't really know, and I'm not sure. I mean, by temperament, I'm very pessimistic. I think everything will end very badly, very soon. So it's difficult for me to talk like that. But there are social experiments that show us that sometimes things work better than other things. And here's an example that is not at all controversial because it's far away. It's in the United States. In the US, there is one central sort of problem of social relations, which is race relations, especially between black and white people. Okay, so there are certain social milieus where the race relations are better and social milieus where they're worse. Now, I could ask you to guess, what is the place in the United States where people think the racial relations are the best, the most comfortable? You don't have to guess because it's very difficult to guess. It's the army. And why is it the army? Well, one explanation is that the army is one of those places where you put your life in the trust of others, and you have to trust them. And you can't operate without having this implicit trust that this person will do what it takes for me not to get killed, but I will do what it takes for them not to get killed. You have interdependence that is very extreme. So you could say, well, is that just that? Well, it seems to be that factor is very important because people who are in the army have very good race relations. When they leave the army, the race relations satisfaction degrades little by little with every year after they've left. Also, in the army, the people who are in combat, who really have to do dangerous things, have much more of a good relation with the other races than people who are in more technical fields, away from the danger. So it seems that one thing that is very crucial for building some kind of better intergroup relations is simply a sort of very powerful signal of interdependence. I depend on them, they depend on me, and that's what is crucial to the situation. Now, is this a general, law of social thing? I don't know, but it's an interesting experiment, in a way, a natural experiment, because it shows that really, if you want groups to have less intergroup conflict and more intergroup confidence or trust, it's not really necessary to tell them that they should get along. What is more important, it seems, is to put them in a situation where they actually depend on each other. I don't know if that's possible for all intergroup relations.
Okay, thanks, Pascal. So it is my turn to give some ending words. So I'm sorry I have to give a boring ending word because as a sociologist, I have mentioned that we always talk about the structure, system, institution all the time, and sociological imagination. So it is time for me to talk about sociological imagination. I think it is so important because you mentioned we have a tendency to develop folk sociology in your book. I highly recommend this book to our Chinese readers. So when you started to think in folk sociology, 民间社会学, that means you always respond to simple size without critical judgment and without critical thinking. So I think we need to have some kind of intellectual exercises, such as learning to slow down our intuitive judgment, to question stories that feel self-evident, and to see social phenomena through the lens of structure, systems, and institutions. So if we can combine that sociological imagination, with empathy and a critical understanding, maybe we can turn our human instinct into something wiser, something that help us understand rather instead of divide. So this is my concluding remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. We are really great on time. We are 1 minute before 4:45. And now this is Q&A time. And before we open the floor to the audience here, I would like to ask a question on behalf of the publisher, CITIC Press. So your book, Minds Make Societies, the English version was published in 2018 from Yale University Press, and the Chinese edition came out in 2023, I believe. But looking back now, are there any new findings or evidence that particularly excite you? Those that kind of either confirm or challenge or refine the core hypotheses in your book or in evolutionary psychology more broadly? And if you were to supplement Minds Make Societies today, what kind of new scientific discoveries would you most likely want to include and to benefit our Chinese audience?
No,
Come on, you are the master in this field. You have to give us something.
I have to answer with a joke by saying, no, everything here is true. There's no other truth in the world. Just read this and you know all you need to know. I have no idea. I mean, there's every day lots of things that challenge your perspective, of course. And if I had to reread this book, I would probably blush in shame and think, no, it's not so simple, it's much more interesting, etc. But at some point, you have to say things in the most direct and popular way possible. So that's what I tried to do there. So I will try to answer people's questions if they have, and Professor Yan as well.
Yeah, and I just want to add that Pascal has a new book coming out in French edition, which is building from the evolutionary psychology approach to explain politics, intergroup relations, coalitional psychology. So I look forward, even though I don't read French, I still look forward to the publication of that book and hope that there will be an English version and in the future, maybe a Chinese edition.
I must say that that's a book that is in English. It's just that for some reason, French people were extremely eager to translate it directly because, and it's very interesting, because they have this perception that their society is falling apart. And they were so eager because they said, oh, you will explain why society falls apart. I said, no, I also explain why we have cooperation, we have positive things.
Yes.
And the French people, they say, yeah, who cares? No, that's not important. What matters is that everything is horrible. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. And so they rushed the translation because they really wanted a negative message. So it's their civilization. I'm not responsible. So.
You sound too Chinese, always too humble. Yeah. Now let's ask questions, get questions from the audience.
如果您可以那个就是用中文也可以，我们可以让那个徐老师翻译，就是好呀。
Hello, Professor Boyer. I've been reading Thomas Sello's book, Becoming Human, recently. He argues that the key developmental difference between humans and chimpanzees is that humans can form joint attention with others and think from multiple perspectives, while apes mostly act from individual intentions. He believes that humans' ability to cooperate also arises from the development of joint attention. What do you think of this view? Is there something that's unique to humans called joint attention? And where do you think our uniquely human psychological abilities comes from? Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a very, it's in a way a technical question about the technical aspect of psychology, early psychology. And it's true that one thing that is very specific about human infants is their capacity to not just engage in what we call joint attention. That is, for example, you must have noticed, those of you who've been around babies or have babies themselves, most of noticed that around 9-10 months of age, babies start to point at things. In general, it's because they want the thing they're pointing at. But very quickly, after a couple of months, what they do is a completely different thing, in which they point at something and they look at your eyes, because they want to check that you are looking at what they're looking at. In other words, that's what we call joint attention. This is something that no other species do. Trying to get the other to attend to something that I'm attending to. In general, in any other species, when you signal, it's to give the others the occasion to attend to your own behavior and not to an external object. Now, this is only one of many of those early capacities that sustain the development of cooperation, but also very much more elementary things like understanding other people's intentions, and even learning language. There's lots of experiments that show that it's a difficult problem for children to acquire words. They acquire thousands of words in a few years, which is a difficult task. When I say, you know, oh, great, the CITIC people gave me a bottle, how do you know that the word bottle refers to this and not to that? There's a very simple cue, which is I was looking at this when I said the word bottle. This is something that young infants do very quickly. They pay attention to other people's attention. And yes, I think but it's only a manifestation of one of the many features whereby we have early development of cooperation. Now we have lots of other kinds of evidence for that. Human infants are also noticing authority and coercion. They can notice, even if you show them little shapes on a screen, that a little shape is trying to force another one to do something, even though the other one does not want to. I'm saying all this in psychological terms, you know, that it wants to another, but in fact, it's just triangles on a screen. So if you program the dynamics in a particular way, the child not only realizes that this blue triangle is trying to force the green triangle to do something, but also that this blue triangle is a bad guy. And when they're asked, after all, to sort of choose, for example, sweets that are given by the blue one and the other one, they don't want the blue one. So they think that this property of this agent is something that will transfer to other interactions between that agent and another one. The psychology of early infancy like that is fascinating, because the more we do it, the more we realize that young babies are incredibly clever and do amazing things in terms of social perception, you know, of authority and things like that. So I invite people, yes, that's something that I would put in the book if I could, because there's lots of progress in that. But thank you for that question.
Hi, so there are certain environments that are particularly high trust. So I'm thinking about like religious spaces, maybe cults, maybe political rallies, where people believe things that could be harmful to them or kind of go against what they witnessed.
Yeah.
You say that we need a balance of like belief and trust to survive. How are these spaces created, and like how is that rational?
Yes, it's a very important question, and it's an important question for lots of societies now, because we realize that we are proceeding, unfortunately, from higher trust to lower trust. And that is something that is general in industrial societies and that people want to counteract, but how can you counteract it? It's very difficult. As I said, the spaces of higher trust very often are spaces in which, or situations in which people have been given enough information about interdependence that they can think that I have to trust others because others are trusting me for their welfare. But if you don't have that perception, of course, the trust level will go down. It's a very complicated question, because in a way, when you have a high trust society, the only thing that can happen is that it will degrade, because in a way, it requires a great deal of smooth working institutions and smooth working agents inside those institutions. Now, if you introduce a little bit of sand in the workings of this machinery, it starts to go worse. It can't get better. And I think it's one of those situations in which, many economists, for example, have wondered about that. And that's an extension of this problem to another sphere. But in Russia, how many people pay their taxes without being threatened, by the state? About 25%. In Sweden, how many people pay before being threatened? 99%. People are happy to contribute. They think, I can give you an other illustration of more trust, less trust. A few years ago, I was working in France, and we had a colleague who came to stay with us for several years, who is from Holland. Holland is a society of higher trust than France. After our colleague had got settled, he rented a flat and stuff like that, he asked me, now, when do I declare to the authorities that I'm here? And in France, this question is so absurd, because you think, don't worry, they will find you. And if they don't find you, you're a lucky man, just ignore them. But I asked him, why do you want the authorities to know you're here? And he said, so I can pay local tax. And again, in France, this answer is the most bizarre, the most extraordinary answer people thought. When I told people, they said, are you sure he's human? Because such a reaction is so strange. Anyway, this is just a bit of a joke, but it's true that we have this situation of differences in trust, and almost no one knows how to go that way, towards the higher trust. I remember when I was talking about this Russian-Swedish example that many economists, many political scientists asked the economists, so how do we get from Russia to Sweden? And the economists, especially the historians and the sociologists, they said, you don't get from Russia to Sweden. You get from Sweden to Sweden to Sweden to Sweden. But if you're in Russia, you're stuck at another equilibrium. And it's true that Sweden managed to create something different, but maybe because they were different in social arrangements for centuries before. So there's no easy way to create higher trust. As I said, it seems to me one major way is to show interdependence, to show people you do depend on the others, but I don't know if that's enough.
Maybe last question? Oh, please.
Great, thank you. First, I want to add a bit on the question about trust. I've been reading papers that distinguish trust and just believing someone as a reliable informant. Trust is an interpersonal relation, which is some kind of specific and emotional, while believing others, treating them as reliable informant is another thing. Yeah, I want to hear a little bit more about this. And a second quick question on morality. Yeah, I'm interested in the case about sitting on one's knees to expressing the respect. But yeah, I think that's a social norm instead of moral norm, right? I think there is a gap between social norms and moral norms. So when you say maybe the morality is dependent on our society, I think you are talking about social norms. So I wonder whether you think there are still some morality independent of the society, the conscience stuff, Yeah, that's my two questions. Thanks.
Okay, so yes, for the second question, I think there is a difference between social conventions and moral norms. And there's been lots of experiments from the 1980s on cross-cultural perception of this difference. So for example, what is the difference? The difference is that if a rule is a social convention, then it implies that it could be different somewhere else. And also it implies that you cannot be blamed for not respecting it if you're not told. So people have done those experiments with lots of kids and, in various cultures, and asking them, there is this culture where it's men who wear skirts and dresses all the time, and it's only women who wear trousers. is that possible? And they say, well, yes, okay. But if you're a person who doesn't know about it and you wear the wrong kind of things, is that bad? And they say, yes, that's bad. But if no one told you, well, then it's less bad, it's okay. But then you have situations like someone gave you something, so as a reaction, you punch their face. Is there a place where that is sort of okay? You know, there's that place where they say it's okay, it's the thing you should do. And even 4-year-olds say, no, probably not. But the person could say, well, it was okay to punch their faces because no one had told me that you mustn't punch a face when people give you something. And children think, no, even if they didn't tell you. So even children have a notion that there is something about moral norms that's a bit different from social convention. Now, you could say, as a social scientist, this difference may not exist, but that difference is in the minds of social actors very often. So I think that's a very complex situation here. But I'm sorry, I forgot the first question because the second one was super interesting.
It's the trust versus belief.
Yes, sorry. Yes, no, of course, I was going way too fast about this. Epistemic trust, that is, this person tells me something, I should believe it's true, is of course different from social trust, that this person wants to help me. However, when people do experiments with 3-year-olds, they realize that even 3-year-olds will not give epistemic trust, I believe the information, to someone who's been bad, morally bad. They have this sort of idea that if someone behaves morally in a reprehensible way, then you shouldn't trust their information, which in a sense makes sense for us because it means, well, the person who's bad to others uses information to be bad to others, so you shouldn't trust their information. But yes, the two are different. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all very much. And do not leave this room now because there's a tiger lurking outside. No, I'm just joking. We have a book signing. We're very lucky to have our author here. So whoever's interested, there are copies of books of Minds and Societies for you to purchase and get the precious signature from a brilliant scholar. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause to our speakers.
Thank you so much. It's really intellectual,
Very
so inspiring.